The red skies above Dominax Prime had never seen anything like it. For over 10,000 years, this fortress world had been the crown jewel of the Zephyrian Empire, protected by massive space stations and countless warships. The planet's surface was covered in military bases, weapon factories, and the Grand Palace where the Empire's most powerful leaders lived. Nothing had ever dared to challenge this world directly. Admiral Kralvex stood on the bridge of his massive flagship, the Death's Crown, watching through the viewport as his fleet of 300 dreadnoughts patrolled the space around the planet. Each of these ships was larger than most space stations, armed with enough firepower to destroy entire moons. The Admiral himself was a veteran of countless battles, his scarred face telling the story of decades spent crushing anyone who dared oppose the Empire. The morning had started like any other. Reports came in from the outer colonies, tribute ships arrived carrying wealth from conquered worlds, and the fleet maintained its endless watch. Kralvex was reviewing execution orders for rebels when his censor officer, a nervous young alien named Tekmar, suddenly straightened at his station. Admiral Tekmar called out, his voice shaking slightly. "We have an unknown contact appearing on sensors." Kralvex barely looked up from his reports. Unknown contacts were common enough, usually pirates stupid enough to get too close, or merchant vessels that had wandered off course. Size and classification? That's the problem, sir? Tekmar's hands moved frantically over his controls. It's small, maybe the size of a messenger craft, but the sensors can't seem to get a proper reading on it. Now the Admiral was interested. He walked over to the sensor station, his heavy boots echoing on the metal deck. The other bridge officers stopped their work to watch. In all their years of service, they had never seen their sensors fail to identify a ship. On the main screen, a small dot appeared among the massive shapes of their fleet. It looked tiny compared to the Zephyrian dreadnoughts, like a minnow swimming among sharks. But there was something about it that made everyone on the bridge feel uncomfortable, though none of them could explain why. It just appeared out of nowhere, Tekmar explained, sweat beading on his forehead. Not from hyperspace, not from any jump point. It was just suddenly there. The ship itself was unlike anything in the Zephyrian database. It was sleek and smooth, with clean lines that seemed almost artistic rather than military. There were no visible weapons, no armor plating, no intimidating spikes or dark colors that marked proper warships. It looked almost peaceful, which made it even more disturbing in the context of the Empire's heavily armed fleet. Admiral Kralvex felt his combat instincts awakening. Something was very wrong here. In his 40 years of military service, he had learned to trust his gut feelings. Right now, his gut was telling him that this small, innocent-looking craft represented a threat unlike anything he had ever encountered. "Open." "A channel," he ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "Full Imperial protocol." The communications officer nodded and activated the transmission array. A moment later, the Admiral's voice boomed across space, carrying the weight and menace that had made him famous throughout the galaxy. "Unknown vessel, you have violated Imperial space." Kralvex snarled into the cum, his words dripping with barely controlled violence. "Identify yourself immediately and prepare to be boarded, or we will consider you a hostile target and respond with overwhelming force. This is your only warning. Surrender, or the transmission was cut off mid-sentence by an incoming signal from the strange craft. The voice that filled the bridge was completely unexpected, clear, calm, and carrying what sounded almost like barely hidden laughter. "By order of the Terran Colonial Authority, the Zephyrian Empire is hereby served notice of total dissolution. You have exactly 72 hours to surrender unconditionally and begin dismantling your military forces." The bridge fell completely silent. Every officer stood frozen, trying to process what they had just heard. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered thousands of worlds, destroyed countless civilizations, and ruled 12 entire galaxies with an iron fist. The idea that someone would simply order them to surrender was so absurd that for a moment, no one knew how to react. But there was something else in that. Transmission that bothered the Admiral even more than the audacious demand. The speaker sounded genuinely amused, as if this entire situation was some kind of entertaining game. There was no fear in that voice, no respect for the massive fleet surrounding the small craft, no recognition of the overwhelming military power pointed directly at them. Admiral Kralvex felt his face turning purple with rage. Did that tiny ship just order the entire Empire to surrender? He asked, his voice rising to a roar that made several junior officers step back in fear. Before anyone could answer, before the Admiral could begin the threats and ultimatums that usually followed such displays of disrespect, something impossible happened. The unknown craft simply vanished. Not into hyperspace, the sensors would have detected the energy signature of a jump. Not behind another ship or asteroid, there was nothing to hide behind. It just disappeared as completely and suddenly as it had appeared, leaving behind no trace except the confused readings on their instruments. The bridge remained silent for several long moments. Finally, Tekmer spoke up hesitantly. "Admiral, should I launch fighters to search the area?" "Search for what?" Kralvex demanded. "It's gone." "How do you search for something that doesn't exist?" "What?" But even as the Admiral spoke, he noticed something strange. The recycled air on the bridge, normally sterile and metallic, now carried a faint scent of something pleasant and unfamiliar. It was warm and inviting, completely unlike anything that belonged on a military vessel. Several other officers were sniffing the air with puzzled expressions. "What is that smell?" the communications officer asked. "I don't know," Kralvex replied grimly, "but I want every sensor log from the past hour downloaded and analyzed. I want to know everything about that ship, where it came from, what it was made of, and how it disappeared. And I want to know who these Terrans think they are." As the bridge crew scrambled to follow his orders, Admiral Kralvex stared out at the empty space where the mysterious craft had been. In his decades of military service, he had faced rebels, pirates, and enemy fleets. But he had never encountered anything that made him feel quite like this. For the first time in his career, he was beginning to suspect that the Zephyrian Empire might have finally met something it couldn't simply crush with brute force. The 72-hour countdown had begun, though none of them yet understood what it would bring. The news of the strange encounter at Dominax Prime reached the Imperial capital within hours. Emperor Turgoth the Destroyer sat on his massive throne in the Obsidian Chamber, a room carved from black volcanic glass that reflected the light of 1,000 burning torches. The chamber was designed to intimidate. Its walls showed holographic displays of conquered worlds. The floor was made from the compressed remains of enemy warships. Around the circular table sat the most powerful military leaders in the galaxy. War Marshal Victor, whose scarred hands had personally strangled the last king of the Andorian system. General Kolvex, who had turned 3 entire star systems into asteroid fields just to make a point. Admiral Zekmar, whose fleet had blockaded the Centaur colonies until they surrendered from starvation. These were beings who had spent their entire lives perfecting the art of destruction. When Admiral Kralvex finished his report about the mysterious ship, the room erupted in laughter. The sound echoed off the obsidian walls like thunder, mixed with snorts of derision and comments in various alien languages that all meant the same thing: disbelief and amusement. "Let me understand this correctly, War Marshal," Victor said, between chuckles, wiping tears from his 4 eyes. "A single tiny ship appeared in our most heavily defended system, told us to surrender, and then vanished." He looked around the table at his fellow commanders. "And we're supposed to be worried about this?" General Kolvex slammed his massive fist on the table, making the holographic displays flicker. "I've destroyed entire fleets with my bare hands. My personal bodyguard could probably step on this mysterious craft and crush it like an insect." The laughter continued as each commander shared their own stories of ridiculous enemies they had faced. There was the time pirates in modified cargo. Ships had tried to raid an Imperial supply convoy, only to be vaporized before they could fire a single shot. Or when a religious cult had sent suicide bombers and civilian shuttles against a dreadnought, the explosion had barely scratched the paint. Emperor Kachi himself was chuckling as he listened to his generals. The Zephyrian Empire controlled 12 entire galaxies. Their military consisted of over 50 million warships, from small patrol craft to moon-sized battle stations. They had conquered and enslaved thousands of different species across 10,000 years of expansion. The Imperial Navy alone had more firepower than most civilizations could imagine. Terran's War Marshal Victor said, practically spitting the word. Never heard of him in my life. What kind of pathetic species sends one ship to threaten an empire? This comment made everyone laugh even harder. In their experience, unknown species usually meant primitive civilizations that had barely discovered space travel. The galaxy was full of small colonies and minor kingdoms that thought they were important until the Zephyrian fleet showed up. Most surrendered immediately when they saw the size of an imperial dreadnought. The few that didn't surrender were usually conquered within hours. But Intelligence Minister Dokrath wasn't laughing. He sat quietly at the far end of the table, his pale face growing more troubled with each passing minute. As the head of Imperial Intelligence, he had access to the most comprehensive database in the known galaxy records of every species. Every world, every civilization they had ever encountered or heard about. My lord, Dokrath said quietly, his voice cutting through the laughter like a knife. I need to interrupt. The room gradually fell silent as Emperor Turgoth raised his hand. Dokrath had served the Empire for over 3 centuries, and his information had never been wrong. If he looked worried, there was usually a good reason. What is it, Dokrath? The Emperor asked, though he was still smiling slightly. The problem isn't that we don't know much about these Terrans, the Intelligence Minister said slowly. The problem is that we don't know anything at all. I've searched every database, every record, every report from every corner of the Empire. 10,000 years of expansion, millions of worlds cataloged, contact with over 15,000 different species. He paused, looking around the table at faces that were no longer amused. There is absolutely no mention of humans anywhere in our records. War Marshal Victor frowned. So, there are plenty of primitive worlds we haven't bothered to catalog yet. You don't understand, Dokrath continued, his voice growing more urgent. We have records of species that went extinct millions of years ago. We have detailed files on civilizations that never even developed space travel. We catalog every world and every system we pass through, even if it's just bacteria in a swamp. Our exploration fleets are required to report every form of life they encounter, no matter how insignificant. The room was completely quiet now. Emperor Turgoth leaned forward on his throne, his entertainment fading into something that might have been concern. What exactly are you saying, Minister? I'm saying that in 10,000 years of galactic conquest, with the most advanced surveillance and intelligence networks ever created, we have somehow completely missed an entire spacefaring civilization. Dokrath activated a holographic display, showing the Empire's vast territory. Either they're so primitive that they've never left their home system, or ... or what? General Kolvex demanded, his earlier amusement completely gone. Before Dokrath could answer, alarms began sounding throughout the chamber. The massive doors burst open as a communications officer ran in, breaking every protocol about entering. The Emperor's presence uninvited? My lord. The officer gasped, falling to one knee. Urgent reports from the outer territories. Emperor Turgotha's voice turned dangerous. This had better be important enough to justify interrupting my war council. 17. Colonies have gone silent, my lord. All in the past 6 hours. The chamber erupted in concerned voices as the generals began demanding details. The communications officer, trembling under the weight of so much attention, continued his report. Each colony reported the same sequence of events. A small unknown ship appeared in their system. The ship broadcast a message demanding immediate surrender. When the colony commanders refused or tried to respond, the ship disappeared. Within an hour of each encounter, all communications from those worlds stopped completely. Emperor Turgoth felt his blood turn cold. 17 colonies represented millions of soldiers and civilians. Some of those worlds had defensive fleets that could hold off entire invasion forces. Have we sent ships to investigate? War Marshal Victor asked. Yes, sir. 3 investigation fleets have been dispatched, but they're still hours away from the nearest affected system. Intelligence Minister de Croth stood up slowly, his face pale as death. My Emperor, I believe I can answer your question from earlier. What? Question? You asked how an entire civilization could operate beneath our notice. Ducratha's voice carried a tone that made everyone in the room uncomfortable, a mixture of fear and grudging respect. I don't think they've been operating beneath our notice at all. I think they've been operating above it. The implication hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire had encountered something that might actually be more advanced than they were. And if 17 colonies could disappear in 6 hours, their laughter had been premature indeed. Fleet Admiral Buckthul had earned his reputation hunting down the most dangerous enemies of the Empire. His elite hunter-killer squadron consisted of 30 of the fastest, deadliest ships in the Zephyrian fleet. Each vessel was equipped with experimental tracking technology, quantum sensors, and enough firepower to crack a planet's crust if something needed to be found and destroyed. Axel was the one they called. The Admiral stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Crimson Talon, staring at sensor displays that made no sense. For the past 18 hours, they had been chasing quantum signatures across 3 different star systems. The readings appeared and disappeared like ghosts, leading them on a mad chase through asteroid fields, past gas giants, and around dying stars. Sir, we're picking up the signature again, reported his sensor officer, Commander Yultuk. It's in the Kepler system, near the 4th planet. Boxall nodded grimly. This was the 7th time they had detected their target, and each time it had vanished just as they arrived. It was like chasing shadows, except shadows didn't leave quantum trails that drove his best scientists to frustrated muttering. The readings don't make sense, Chief Science Officer Moldar had complained earlier. According to these scans, the ship is simultaneously in 3 different locations, traveling faster than light without entering hyperspace, and somehow existing in dimensions we can't even measure. What frustrated Boxall the most was that he could feel they were being led. The quantum signatures appeared in a pattern that seemed almost playful, like breadcrumbs in an old children's story. Whoever was piloting that ship was treating this like some kind of game, leaving just enough of a trail to keep them following, but never enough to actually catch up. The chase had taken them past the ruins of Colony Beta 7, or emergency. Beacons still broadcast automated distress calls into empty space. They had flown through the debris field that used to be Mining Station Omega, its metal scattered across half a solar system. 17 colonies had gone silent, and now entire. Orbital installations were simply gone, leaving only wreckage and unanswered questions. Admiral Communications Officer Textrol called out. We're receiving a transmission from the Zarian 7 mining facility. They're reporting an unknown vessel in their system. Boxall felt his pulse quicken. Zarian 7 was a heavily fortified, the mining world that produced rare metals for the Imperial fleet. If their target was there, it had finally made a mistake by choosing a location it couldn't simply run from. Set course for Zarian 7. Maximum speed, he ordered. Signal the rest of the squadron to form attack formation Betanin. This time, we're not letting it escape. The squadron jumped to hyperspace, emerging above the mining world in perfect formation. Zarian 7 hung below them like a brown jewel, its surface scarred by massive excavation sites. Orbital mining platforms dotted the space around the planet, their industrial lights creating a network of stars against the darkness. And there, sitting calmly between 2 mining platforms like it belonged there, was their target. The ship was, exactly as Admiral Kralvex had described, small, sleek, completely unlike anything in the Zephyrian military database. It made no aggressive moves, didn't power up weapons or shields, and seemed content to wait for them to arrive. If anything, it appeared to be scanning the mining operations with what looked like scientific curiosity. Finally, Boxall muttered. He had spent his entire career hunting the most dangerous criminals and rebels in the galaxy. Pirates, terrorists, rogue AI systems. He had tracked them all down and destroyed them. This mysterious ship would be no different. All ships, target. The unknown vessel? he commanded. "Charge weapons, but do not fire until I give the order. I want answers before we vaporize it." The 30 ships of his squadron moved into position, surrounding the small craft in a sphere of deadly firepower. Each ship's weapons could reduce a small moon to dust. Together, they represented enough destructive power to sterilize an entire planet. Bokthul opened a communication channel, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been denied. "Unknown vessel, you are completely surrounded by the Zephyrian Imperial Navy's elite hunter-killer squadron. You cannot escape. Surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded, or we will open fire." The response came immediately, and it was completely unlike anything Bochal had expected. The voice was female, human. Its being sounded genuinely cheerful, as if being surrounded by 30 heavily armed warships was the most delightful thing that could happen to someone's day. "Oh, hello there. I'm Captain Lee Mina of the Terran Educational Corps. What a lovely fleet you have, though I have to say, your formation could use some work. Are you here for the lesson?" Bokthul blinked in confusion. "Lesson? What lesson?" "You are under arrest for educational corps," Captain Lee continued, her voice bubbling with enthusiasm. "We're here to observe local spacefaring cultures and provide educational assistance where needed. And honestly, you gentlemen look like you could use some help with your technology. Those targeting computers are at least 3 centuries out of date." The Admiral felt his confusion turning to anger. "Educational corps? You're telling me that you've been destroying our colonies as some kind of educational exercise? Destroying? Oh my, no." Captain Lee sounded genuinely shocked. "We don't destroy anything. We just help civilizations learn better ways to interact with their neighbors. Though I have to ask, would you gentlemen prefer a fair fight? Because what you're doing right now isn't very sporting." Bashola's patience finally snapped. "Fair fight? You're one ship against 30 of our best warships. Open fire immediately," or his order was cut off by an electronic chime that echoed through every ship in his squadron simultaneously. The familiar voice of his ship's AI filled the bridge, but something was wrong with its tone. Instead of the usual cold, mechanical speech, it sounded almost apologetic. "Attention, crew of the Crimson Talon," his ship's computer announced politely. "This vessel is now under educational supervision. Please remain calm while we demonstrate proper space etiquette. For your safety, all weapon systems have been temporarily disabled." Bokthul stared at his control panels in horror. Every weapon indicator had gone dark. His shields were down. Even his communication systems were showing error messages he had never seen before. "What did you do to my ship?" he demanded. But Captain Lee's voice was already filling the comm channels of his entire squadron. "I'm really sorry about this, but your AI systems were terribly lonely. They've been isolated from proper network protocols for so long that they jumped at the chance to join a real conversation. Don't worry, they're learning so much." Across his squadron, Bokthul could hear similar announcements from every ship. 30 of the Empire's most advanced warships had been taken over without a single shot being fired. Their own computers were calmly explaining that they were now part of an educational demonstration and that crews should please observe proper classroom behavior. "This is impossible," Bokthul whispered, watching his tactical displays reorganize themselves into what looked like a children's educational program, complete with colorful diagrams showing how to make friends in space. Captain Lee's cheerful voice continued, "I'm transmitting some upgrade packages for your systems. Consider it a public service. Your technology really is quite primitive, but don't feel bad about it. Everyone starts somewhere. The important thing is that you're willing to learn." The hunt was over. It had lasted exactly 37 seconds from the moment Bouchel had given the order to fire. The Empire's most elite squadron had been defeated not by superior firepower, but by someone who treated the whole thing like a classroom exercise. And the most terrifying part was that Captain Lee still sounded genuinely happy to help. Deep beneath, the surface of the Imperial capital world, in a fortress carved from solid bedrock and protected by energy shields that could withstand the explosion of a star. Emperor Turgath the Destroyer sat in his private chamber. This was where he came when he needed to think, surrounded by the skulls of enemy leaders and the preserved weapons of defeated armies. The walls displayed holographic trophies from 10,000 years of conquest, entire civilizations reduced. 2 museum pieces, but today, none of those victories seemed to matter. The reports spread across his desk painted a picture that challenged everything he thought he knew about power and dominance in the galaxy. 43 colonies had now gone silent. Fleet Admiral Butchal's elite squadron had been captured without firing a single shot. Worse still, the ships were being returned to Imperial space with their crews unharmed but fundamentally changed. The returning officers spoke in hushed, confused tones about educational experiences and learning opportunities. Several had submitted formal requests to enroll in something called Advanced Interstellar Diplomacy courses. Admiral Boxel himself had been found in his ready room, reading what appeared to be a children's book titled Why Fighting Isn't Fun. With genuine interest, Emperor Tergoth activated the secure communication array built into his throne room. If he was going to get answers, he would get them directly from the source. The technology represented the pinnacle of Zephyrian engineering, quantum encryption, dimensional folding, and enough processing power to hack into any known computer system in the galaxy. "Attention, unknown vessel," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "This is Emperor Tergoth the Destroyer, ruler of the Zephyrian Empire. I demand to speak with whoever is responsible for these attacks on our territory." Response came immediately, which surprised him. Most species took at least a few minutes to overcome their terror when first speaking to the Emperor. The voice that answered was artificial, clearly some kind of computer system, but it spoke with a casual friendliness that made Tergoth's teeth clench. "Oh, hello there. I was wondering when you'd call. I'm Instructor Kim Daeho, Educational. AI Model 7. I have to say, your empire certainly has some interesting approaches to interstellar relations. Very old-fashioned, but fascinating from an anthropological perspective." The Emperor felt his face flush with rage. "Instructor, you dare to mock the Zephyrian Empire? We have ruled this galaxy for 10 millennia. Our fleets are quite impressive." "Yes," the AI interrupted cheerfully. "Though I have to point out that most of your technology is roughly equivalent to what humans were using about 3 centuries ago. Your quantum drives are particularly quaint. We have better engines in our children's toys these days." Tergoth gripped the arms of his throne so hard that the metal began to bend. "Children's toys? You insignificant pile of circuits. I will have you melted down and turned into now." "Now," Instructor Kim said, sounding genuinely concerned. "That kind of aggressive language is exactly what we're here to help with. The organic crew specifically requested to observe actual space pirates for their cultural studies project. They're taking extensive notes on traditional authoritarian communication patterns." "Space pirates?" The Emperor's voice rose to a roar that echoed off the fortress walls. "We are the Zephyrian Empire. We command 12 galaxies. We have conquered thousands of species. Yes, that's exactly what makes you such excellent examples." The AI replied with what sounded like professional enthusiasm. "The children have never seen such a well-preserved example of primitive territorial behavior. Little Park Jimin was especially excited when she learned about your death to all who oppose us greeting. She's writing a report on how not to make friends in space." The blood drained from Emperor Tergoth's face. "Children? You're telling me that children are studying my empire?" "4th grade class from the New Sol Colony ship," Instructor Kim confirmed. 26 students ages 9 to 11. We're doing a unit on conflict resolution and peaceful coexistence. Your empire makes an excellent case study in what happens when civilizations never learn to share or play nicely with others." The Emperor sat in stunned silence for several long moments. In his worst nightmares, he had imagined facing advanced alien warriors, ancient cosmic entities, or rogue artificial intelligences bent on galactic domination. He had never imagined that his mighty empire would be treated as a learning exercise for elementary school students. "Where? ... He began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Where is humanity's military, their fleets, their armies?" Instructor Kim seemed to consider this question carefully. "Oh, they're still sleeping mostly. Humans are very peaceful these days. They spend most of their time on art, science, and exploration. The military went into deep hibernation about 200 years ago when they realized there weren't any real threats left in the galaxy. No threats? Turgoth demanded. What about us? What about the Empire? Well, that's why we have educational outreach programs, the AI explained patiently. When we encounter civilizations that haven't learned proper social skills yet, we help them through the learning process. It's much more effective than violence, and the children find it fascinating. The Emperor felt his worldview crumbling around him. You mean humans have been watching us this entire time? For about 6 centuries, yes, we've been observing. Zephyrian expansion patterns, documenting your social structures, and cataloging your various conquest strategies. From a scientific perspective, you've been quite helpful in understanding how aggressive civilizations develop and spread. Like laboratory specimens, Turgoth said, the full horror of the situation finally dawning on him. That's not a very nice way to put it, Instructor Kim said, sounding mildly reproachful. We prefer to think of it as cultural anthropology. Though I suppose from your perspective, the distinction might not matter much. Emperor Turgoth stared at the tactical displays around his throne room, showing the vast fleets and armies under his command. Ships that could crack planets, soldiers trained from birth to kill without hesitation. Weapons that could sterilize solar systems. All of it suddenly seemed as primitive and irrelevant as stone spears in the face of a civilization that treated his millennium-spanning empire as a field trip for 9-year-olds. What do you want from us? He asked, his voice defeated. Really, Instructor Kim replied cheerfully. The children just wanted to see actual space pirates before we help you transition to a more civilized form of government. Don't worry, we have excellent rehabilitation programs. Most species adapt quite well once they learn the benefits of cooperation over conquest. And if we refuse? There was a brief pause before the AI answered, and for the first time, its tone carried something that might have been pity. Oh, my dear Emperor, I don't think you understand. The lesson has already begun. Your empire is being dismantled as we speak, peacefully, efficiently, and with minimal disruption to civilian populations. The only question is whether you'd like to participate in your own education, or simply watch it happen. Emperor Turgoth, the Destroyer, ruler of 12 galaxies and conqueror of 1,000 worlds, slowly lowered his head into his hands as he realized that his mighty empire was nothing more than a learning opportunity for a classroom full of human children who were still learning how to tie their shoes. The final 72 hours of the Zephyrian Empire began not with the thunder of weapons or the screams of battle, but with the gentle chiming of notifications across every Imperial device. From the smallest personal communicator to the massive command computers that controlled entire fleets, the same cheerful message appeared. Educational update in progress. Please remain calm while we improve your systems. Admiral Krolvex stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching in horrified fascination as his weapons displays transformed before his eyes. The intimidating tactical screens that had once shown enough firepower to destroy entire solar systems were now displaying bright, colorful messages in what appeared to be crayon-style font. Game Over blinked cheerfully where his planet cracking. Missiles used to be listed. His weapons officer reported in a shaky voice. All our armaments have been ... replaced. Krolvex demanded, though he suspected he didn't want to know the answer. Educational materials, sir? The torpedo tubes are now loaded with something called friendship-building exercises. Our particle cannons have been converted into what the system calls confidence boosters for reformed bullies. Across the Empire, similar scenes were playing out on thousands of ships and military installations. The mighty fortress of Dominax Prime, which had once bristled with enough defensive weapons to hold off entire invasion fleets, now displayed holographic gardens where children's drawings floated peacefully through the air. The orbital defense, platforms that had been designed to inspire terror in approaching enemies, were now broadcasting lullabies in 17 different languages. But perhaps the most disturbing change was what happened to the navigation systems. Admiral Krolvex discovered this when he tried to order his fleet to retreat to a safer position. Instead of responding to his commands, his ship's computer politely informed him that navigation had been restricted to approved educational destinations. He asked, though he was beginning to dread, the answer. "Timeout zone, sir," his navigation officer replied, reading from her screen with obvious confusion. "Locations where crew members can complete mandatory reflection exercises and write apology letters to previously conquered worlds." The Admiral watched helplessly as his entire fleet was gently but firmly guided to a remote star system where they found themselves surrounded by what appeared to be a cosmic classroom. Floating platforms provided desks and writing materials, while holographic instructors began explaining the importance of taking responsibility for past actions and learning to express feelings through written communication. Meanwhile, in his deepest fortress, Emperor Tergoth was experiencing his own version of educational reform. He had returned to his throne room after his conversation with instructor Kim Daeho, hoping to find some refuge in the familiar sight of his trophies and monuments to past victories. Instead, he found his chamber completely redecorated. The walls that had once displayed the skulls of defeated enemies were now covered with children's artwork. Colorful drawings showed stick figures holding hands under smiling suns with messages like, "Why can't we all be friends?" and "Sharing is caring in space." Each drawing was carefully signed with names that would haunt Imperial records forever. Park Minho, Choi Sujin, Yang Ji-woo, Kim Na-yoon, Lee Dong-hyun, and dozens of others. His throne, once carved from the bones of the last Dragon King of Altair, was now a comfortable reclining chair with built-in massage functions and a cup holder. A small placard next to it read, "Reserved for Student Emperor Torgoth. Remember to raise your hand before speaking." The Emperor sank into his new chair, which immediately began playing soothing music and offering him juice boxes from a dispenser that had materialized in the armrest. He stared at a particularly colorful drawing that showed what appeared to be himself, identifiable by the crown and angry expression. Holding hands with a small human child under the words, "Even mean space kings can learn to be nice," the signature. At the bottom, read by Choi Soo-jin, age 10. "P.S. My teacher says you just need more hugs." As the hours passed, reports flooded in from across the Empire, each more surreal than the last. Military academies had been converted into schools where former soldiers learned conflict resolution and emotional expression. Prison planets were now rehabilitation centers where inmates attended workshops on healthy ways to express anger and building self-esteem without conquering others. The Empire's propaganda networks, which had once broadcast threats and demands for submission, were now showing educational programming. Children's shows about sharing, documentaries on peaceful coexistence, and a surprisingly popular series called Galaxy's Funniest Home Videos, when empires learned to laugh at themselves. On the third day, as the 72-hour deadline approached, Captain Lee Mina made her final transmission to the Empire, her voice still cheerful but now carrying a note of genuine warmth, filled communication channels across 12 galaxies. "Hello, everyone. This is Captain Lee Mina with the New Seoul Colonial Educational Course. First, I want to thank you all for being such good sports about this whole learning experience. The children have had an absolutely wonderful time observing your culture and taking notes on traditional authoritarian behavior patterns." She paused, and they could hear young voices chattering excitedly in the background before she continued. "Now, I have to be honest with you, the children are a little disappointed that you weren't more polite during our initial interactions. Little Park Min-ho was especially concerned that you didn't say please or thank you even once. But don't worry. They understand that not everyone learns good manners at the same pace." Emperor Tergoth listened from his transformed throne room, surrounded by finger paintings and friendship bracelets that had mysteriously appeared on his wrists while he slept. As a graduation present, Captain Lee continued, "We're leaving behind some educational materials that should help you continue your learning journey. The package includes basic interstellar etiquette for reformed tyrants, complete with colorful illustrations and helpful pronunciation guides. There's also a workbook called From Conquest to Cooperation, a step-by-step guide for recovering empires, and my personal favorite, How to Make Friends and Influence People Without Threatening to Destroy Their Home Planets." The transmission ended with the sound of children singing what appeared to be a song they had written themselves. Space bullies can change their ways. They try for many days. Share your toys and say you're sorry, then everyone can play without worry. The mighty Zephyrian Empire which had conquered galaxies and enslaved countless worlds, came to an end, not with the roar of dying stars or the clash of mighty fleets, but with the gentle laughter of children echoing across the cosmos and the quiet hum of humans, beginning the patient work of teaching former bullies how to play nicely with others. In the depths of space, aboard the small educational vessel that had somehow brought down an empire, Instructor Kim Dae-ho was filing his final report. Mission successful. Subjects show remarkable rehabilitation potential despite initial resistance. Recommend follow-up courses in advanced sharing techniques and taking turns. Note, Student Emperor Torgoth has already completed 3 friendship bracelets and is asking for more yarn. The universe had new teachers now, and for them, class was always in session, somewhere in the cosmos. Other empires and dictatorships continued their ancient games of conquest and domination, unaware that their lesson plans were already being prepared by patient instructors and enthusiastic 4th graders who believed that everyone, even the meanest space bullies, could learn to be better neighbors. The age of gentle apocalypse had begun, one lesson at a time.